All right, so basically, Ella told you all the sources of funding, and I'm going to tell you why you're never going to get any of it. Execution Labs is an early-stage investor focused on game studios, which is quite rare. There's not many of us around. We've done about 25 deals over the past few years, and we've said no to many, many, many more. I don't remember the exact metrics, but maybe we pick one studio to invest in out of every few hundred pitches, and so you get really good at saying no. And so this presentation is sort of looking at some of the reasons why you won't get funding. First one maybe seems obvious, but surprisingly, a lot of developers are making crap. Now, if you're just sort of, experimenting, having fun, maybe you're a student, you're an amateur, you're just exploring the medium of games, that's fine. But if you're making something and you actually want funding from a publisher, from an investor, don't pitch us the crap. And it's interesting, even today or yesterday at the show, you have developers who admit that what they're building is not very good, and they think they're probably not going to make money with it, but they're here anyways to pitch it to publishers and investors, and it boggles the mind that why bother if you're making crap? Related to that is the notion of pitching problems as opposed to opportunities. This one is slightly less obvious, and this happens all of the time. And I would say 9 times out of 10, we're pitched problems. We'll get a call or we'll meet a developer, they'll set up a meeting, they've got this cool game, they have their team, but it's taking longer, big surprise, they didn't budget accordingly, they forgot to budget marketing, they don't have any money to go to PAX or GDC, they need to hire an audio person to fix their audio and they have no budget for that. Are you interested? Am I interested in what? The problem that you didn't budget correctly and you don't have the timeline and the resources to pay for your programmers and so on? Exactly. Are you interested? And so, developers tend to be problem solvers. And so one of the problems they have is lack of money. And so they're going to go out into the world and fix that problem by finding someone who's going to give them some money to fix their money problem, as opposed to reframing it as an opportunity and understanding what they're doing is an opportunity, and pitching that and talking to us about the opportunity that the game or the studio represents. Now, that may mean they still have some cash flow issues, but don't pitch the problem, pitch the opportunity. It's a red flag right from the beginning. Related to that is this sort of notion of offloading all of the risk to the investors or the publishers. And the classic for that one is, well, I'm working at wherever, EA or Ubisoft, and me and my friends will quit our jobs as soon as you give us $10 million to make this amazing game that we have a sketch of. And that's sort of the extreme example, but some version of that happens quite often. Or there's one person who's working on it and all of his friends haven't quit their jobs yet or doing something else, they have day jobs, and once we get all the money, then we'll work on it full time. Or you're trying something experimental and you're not quite sure if it's going to succeed, and so you don't want to risk your own resources, so let's go get some sucker investor to give us a bunch of money and we'll burn their money in this experiment, and we'll have someone else pay for our learnings. And developers don't necessarily see it that way, and they don't say it like that, but as an investor, that's how it's perceived. And so you'll never get funding if it's clear that you're trying to offload that risk, or you're not personally kind of diving in and investing and taking the first bit of risk. The other one, quite common for developers who don't really understand how funding is done, they don't actually know what they're raising for. And the classic here is confusion over whether or not you're raising funds for your company or you're raising funds for your project. And there's a massive difference between project funding and company funding. in terms of sources of that funding, in terms of how those deals are structured, in terms of the economics, right? So if you're funding your company, you're receiving funds in exchange for equity, usually, in your company. It's a long-term relationship. The pressure is on growth of the company, etc. If you're raising funds for a project, generally it's a revenue-based deal, so they give you funding now in exchange for future royalty or revenue. And then it's more about kind of control over that IP and restrictions and rights on the IP versus, some rights and control of or board seat votes of the company and so on. So, there's a whole sort of other workshop for each of those, project funding and company funding. But what we often see is developers come to us with their problem of not having money, and they just want a bag of money, and they're not really thinking about what are they actually raising against. And so this is linked again to what's the opportunity as opposed to the problem, and just knowing what it is you're actually raising funds for. And this is sort of I wouldn't say it's a trap, but it's a big mistake. Whereas if what you're really looking for is money for this project, and then you call up a whole bunch of VCs, you're wasting each other's time, right? VCs, as an example, don't do generally project funding. So assuming you even know what you're raising funds for, big mistake is you often ask for too much or too little. And the too much example is these guys from Ubisoft that say, well, give me $10 million and I'll quit my job. There's no way you're getting $10 million out of the gate like that. For those who were in Ella's talk before, she mentioned this sort of incremental nature of funding, right? You get a little bit from an angel, you build a prototype, then you're able to get, publishing deal with more funding, and sort of you kind of stitch together your funding. It's rare, absolutely rare, that you can just walk in and get the whole chunk of funding in one shot. Extremely, extremely rare. And particularly in terms of company financing. Or you haven't done enough to validate a large sum of money. And so certainly on the VC side of things, they're looking for key proof points. Right? We want to see that you can build the prototype. We want to see that you can soft launch. We want to see the traction to that, then that validates providing funding. And so if you just ask for the whole batch of money in one shot, you haven't sort of proven that you're worth receiving that money. Conversely, on the too little side, this is notorious on the Kickstarter front, right, where really the project needs $500,000, but they'll only ask for $20,000 because they don't want to scare anyone away, and they're sort of playing with the psychology of Kickstarter. But it's actually dangerous, right? It's dangerous if you need $500,000 and you put 20 as your mark and you get 50. It's really dangerous to take that 50,000 when really what you need is 500. And what we see on the sort of studio level is developers are not thinking holistically in terms of all of the money they need, right? They'll often just think about what's the money I need to build the game. And building the game is not enough, right? You need money to come to shows. You need money to do some amount of marketing. Even if you're going to use a publisher, you still need money to go to events to meet those publishers or fly to them and so on, to do work with influencers, the trailer, all of this kind of stuff that's important to launching the game but is not building the game per se. Or if you're thinking about the runway of the company, it's rare that studios will think about the runway of the studio, right? They'll think about, again, what's the money I need to pay the designers and artists and programmers to build this game. They're not thinking about, okay, well, hold on a second. Even if I launch the game and it's out there and I'm waiting for revenue to come in and I have to pay my team to build DLC or updates or do live ops, but no revenue's coming in, I need cash for 3 extra months before any revenue comes in. And if all you did was plan to the budget to launch the game, then you can be zero in the bank account with a game on the market and no you're waiting for Apple to send a check or whatever. And so when we're looking at studios, we ask for the budget. We want to see the whole budget for the studio, not just the production budget of the game, and certainly the younger the studio, the less likely they have this more holistic budget. So yeah, knowing the right amount. Related to that is the idea of asking sort of the wrong people at the wrong time. There's life cycle to studios, to companies, and when you're just starting out, there's 3-4 of us, we're in a startup, let's go get some money, some seed money. Normally, that's the point where you would go what they call the 3 Fs, right? Friends, family, and fools. And small amounts, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, to get the company bootstrapped and rolling. When you're just getting started, you don't go see a growth VC that normally writes checks of 20 to 50 million, right? You're not ready to see them. Same thing, if you've launched a game and your burn rate is 100,000 a month, you don't go see your uncle for a $10,000 investment because it's way past, you're way past the point where that's going to be useful to you. And so understanding how much money you need and at what time in the life cycle of the company is super critical in terms of who you go pitch and who you try to get money from and how much you get from them. And so, this is all of them are big reasons why you don't get the funding, but this is one of the major ones, is a complete mismatch of how much money you need at what stage of the company and when you're going to go talk to investors, different investors. For this one in particular, there's a lot of resources out there for startups, tech startups, and funding in general that's unrelated to the game industry. That gives a nice overview of kind of the different cycles of investment and which kinds of investors invest at which stages. And so just Googling sort of on the tech startup investment side, you'll find a lot of good information and knowledge. This one is an interesting one that can kind of really poison the company in terms of your corporate structure. Oftentimes, you don't even have a corporate structure, which is particularly challenging if you're trying to get company investment, right? So we'll get pitched by 3 people, and they don't have a company, but they want money for the like I have to send the check somewhere, and it's not going in your personal pocket. And so you have to have a corp for us to even invest in. This is even if you're trying to get publishing funding or even Kickstarter, you still need some kind of legal entity, corporate entity, and it's just sort of good practice to have that, but oftentimes it's not done. A sort of another issue is the shares. Ella mentioned this one briefly in her talk in terms of the equity and how shares are divided up. Oftentimes if it's 3 of us starting a company, we say, okay, we'll split the equity 3 ways. We each get 33%. That's not bad. Bigger problem is if you've sort of promised all of your friends a slice of equity because they're going to test the game, or your uncle said, I'll give you $10,000 to start this company, but I want half of it. And you're like, oh, what the hell, 10 grand, sure, uncle, 50-50. And it makes no sense now because your uncle's not actually going to be active in the running of the company, and yet he's sitting there with 50% of the equity of the company. And then if I'm an investor coming in, I don't like that. I appreciate that your uncle gave you a few dollars to start the company, but he's kind of dead weight on the cap table, on the ownership of the company. And so investors will scrutinize your equity divisions to ensure that the people running the company are sufficiently motivated and incentivized to build it, grow it, to succeed. And there's a whole bunch of stuff around the cap table and corporate structure, which if you screw it up, investors will just walk away. And we've done that. We've done that where we see something interesting, we see a cool team, an interesting project, and you look, it's like, oh, this is just a landmine. We cannot actually invest in that structure. So you have to be very, very mindful of that. Related to the corporate structure and sort of poisoning your structure is on the revenue share side. And this is sort of a trap that a lot of indies get into, where they make promises of revenue share, right? Because they don't have money to pay. So they say, listen, when we make money, we'll give you X% for the audio person. We'll give X% to the person that's giving some animations. And you're sort of creating this sort of ball of duct tape that you're doing to try to get the labor onto the team, the resources on the team. But then if a publisher is looking at that and say, well, hey, my normal economics is, I take this percent, you take that percent, and then you say, oh, well, I've already promised the audio person X and the QA person Y, and it starts getting messy, and potentially publishers will just walk away because it's like the economics are broken now because you've made all these promises. Even from an investor point of view, from a VC point of view, I want all that revenue to go back into company for the company to grow, to have runway, to make the next project. And if I see that you're sort of doling out a majority of the revenue, that's a big concern. Finally, sort of other legal entanglements. We see this all the time where, a company was started, maybe there was a dispute amongst co-founders. One of the co-founders did the animations, and now they left, and they're sort of fighting you to take the animations out, and or someone did all this kind of silliness. And then if I'm going to invest in that, well, hold on a second. It sounds like there's a bit of drama here. I don't want to invest, and all of a sudden, the thing I invested in, half of it goes away because you had a dispute with your partner, or you didn't have proper contracts and IP assignment with your employees, and someone got pissed off and wants all their code back or something like that. And so, then there's all kinds of other stuff in terms of the use of open source software and, trademark and patent infringements and copyright, all this kind of stuff. But it matters, right? If someone's going to give you money, give you funding, they want to make sure that the house is clean, that you don't have any of these loose ends, disputes. In fact, in most of the contracts you'll sign, you have to say, yeah, we're good. We don't have any of these issues. Finally, I didn't have really a better term for this, but what I'm calling sovereign issues, it's very risky in terms of some geographic locations. For example, not to pick on Argentina, but it's very hard to put money in and out or get money in and out of Argentina. Same thing with China. Same thing with Russia. There's certain places where it's difficult. There's friction. It's hard to do business. It's hard to put money in. And if you generate revenue or returns, hard to get that money back out. There's also sort of, the rigorousness of corporate law. So if there's a dispute and we've invested in a team in Russia, we're going to go to Russia to fight in the courts of, so there's these kind of issues. Or, you're investing in a region that has political strife, or there's, war going on and stuff. It's really difficult to invest in a company. I mean, we were doing a few years ago, we were looking at studios in Kiev, and they were like, we're losing our energy today because there's some, bombs dropping over there, so we have to move to the countryside where our computers are working. And so that's, it's hard to invest in that sort of context. Well, so those are just some things to kind of look out for. Some of the reasons why investors, publishers, and other folks that would like to give you money don't give you money. And hopefully if you do the inverse of all that, then the dollar bills will reign. Thank you very much. I think we have time for one or two questions. Dean? Well, yeah, wait for the...
So on your first point, what are some good ways to tell that you're not making crap?
Well, I mean, yeah, you know it when you see it. Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, so a big part of that is if you yourself think that it's not a great game and probably won't sell, in your gut, that's probably the first indicator that it's probably crap. The other one is a lot of developers don't do competitive analysis or market analysis, where they try to see, I'm making Robot Ninja game. Well, what other Robot Ninja games are out there? How do they do on which platforms? What do the sales look like? Do a little bit of Steam Spy or App Annie research. And, if every other Robot Ninja whatever game has only sold 500 copies, then maybe that's not a good sort of niche of the market for me to be in. Or if there is some successful comparables, then you gauge, well, how close am I to the successful ones in terms of look, feature, quality, polish, versus how close am I to the ones that didn't do well, again, in terms of features, etc. So that's a way to gauge. And then, of course, coming to events and shows, is a good sort of barometer for getting user input and input from the community. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect science, but there are indicators. But I mean, no joke. I'll get developers say, "Yeah, I don't think it's going to do very well, but we're making it anyways. Do you want to invest?" Like literally, that's what they'll say. So, yeah, good question. Anything else? I think I scared everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's a very quick overview. I mean, almost every one of those slides could have been an hour-long deep dive on different aspects of funding and investment. So, there's not a lot of knowledge on this in the game industry. There's a little bit from lectures here and lectures at GDC, but a good place to learn, certainly on the VC and investment side, is just to look at the general tech startup investment side. I mean, there'll be some translation you have to do in your head, but that'll give you a good starting point. All right, thank you very much. Oh, there's another question. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
So, one question about investment is, do investors want to see a game that's halfway there, ready? Do they do not want to invest in games that have been released or are in a beta stage and aid with the marketing? Or do you just want a plan, as you said, with a budgeting plan and invest from the beginning? Is there a difference in how to pitch that?
Well, I mean, again, it's are you raising funds for the project or the company?
For the project, and we already have a project. You, as a publisher, probably like it. You see that it could do some work, and we are on a pre-release stage already. But we lack the funding and the context to make marketing.
Yeah.
So
I mean, pitching publishers is a whole other workshop. I mean, each one is slightly different, and so a big part of it is just meeting them and talking to them to understand where do they like to invest, at what stage, at what level. Different publishers will write different size checks. So if your project is too big or too small, you don't kind of match their criteria. Some of them, or I think all of them, want to play the game, whether it's a bit earlier or a bit later. Oftentimes they'll want to have enough time to be able to work with you to optimize the game, as well as think about the marketing plan. So if it's like the game is done and we're launching tomorrow, do you want to help us? There's no time for us to actually work with you and build up a marketing strategy and so on. So there is sort of a timing issue there. Okay. But each publisher is a little bit different. So
and it's a no-go for investors. I mean, we can find a publisher later, but if we have the money as a company to market our project,
so investors want to invest in the company and the long-term potential growth of the company. Right. So you don't pitch a project to investors that want to invest in companies. You have to pitch the company, the roadmap, the vision, the potential you have, why your company is going to become amazing and grow. Okay. So if you're looking for project funding, then go find funding from sources of project financing. Don't waste your time with VCs and investors.
With investors. All right. Okay, thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you, everyone.